And the final paper has two co-authors. These are two graduate students in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Windsor. And please welcome James Murphy and Josie Richards. And the title of the paper, Zombies, They Walk Among Us, a philosophical approach to surviving the zombie apocalypse. Thank you.
So here's an overview of our paper. There are a lot of different components that went into making our concept work, so this is here just to provide a friendly breakdown of our thought process. The paper is divided into 3 sections. The first explains the kind of zombie that we have conceptualized to be present in the apocalypse. Rather than the half-dead brain eater, we draw from Haitian voodoo and Aristotle to suggest that the kind of zombie we have in mind is related to a mindless consumer who has a weakened capacity to will, deliberate, and critically think. In the second section, we discuss how these zombies came into being. Here, we will draw on Marx and Freud to describe how the capitalist mode of production led to narcissism, which in turn was manipulated by advertisers, which caused the zombified state of society today. Our third section will focus on our solution to surviving and ultimately escaping the zombie apocalypse. Here, we will draw on Kant and Adorno and Becker to suggest that the way out of our current predicament is to re-educate individuals to think critically and for themselves. So let's get into it. In George A. Romero's 1978 classic zombie film, Dawn of the Living Dead, zombies are satirically portrayed wandering mindlessly around the mall. For this paper, we try to take this satire a bit more seriously by putting some theoretical weight behind it. We argue that many of us living under the condition of late capitalism are zombies. Drawing on both Haitian voodoo, religious concepts, as well as philosophical ones, this paper will show that consumers are zombies to the extent that they shop, not because they actually need things, but as a result of manipulation by advertising. In order to avoid this condition and survive the apocalypse of zombie consumers, we need to be educated to think critically about why it is that we are so attracted to consumer culture and the social forces behind this attraction, which subject us to constant manipulation. The zombie myth comes to us from the Haitian religious cult of voodoo, as opposed to the more familiar movie zombies, which feed on living human flesh. Haitian voodoo zombies are the focus of this paper because of the way that Haitian voodoo ideas of the soul and zombies as fetish objects can be taken up in a philosophical discussion.
Okay, so voodoo believers understand the soul to be a duality. One part is responsible for basic biological functions, such as breathing, heartbeat, and other organic or metabolic life processes. This part of the soul is considered to be the large part of the soul, and this is known as
Gros bon ange.
thank you, which translates literally to big good angel. The other part of the soul, known as the
Petit bon ange.
or little good angel, is responsible for personality, character, and willpower. Here, it will be referred to as the small part of the soul. Got my papers mixed up here. This duality can also be understood in terms of the duality between the mind and the body. So the mind is the small part of the soul, and the body is a large part of the soul. In Haitian voodoo mythology, if an individual dies of unnatural means, their soul becomes vulnerable to necromantic manipulation by voodoo practitioners known as bakors. Using dark magic, the bakor can separate the large part of the soul from the small mental part of the soul, and then reactivate the biological part. This creates a living, more or less mindless zombie with no will, personality, or character of their own, despite the fact that they still have a heartbeat, can breathe, and can perform all the other metabolic processes of the body that keep them alive. Some say that the bakor keeps the small part of the soul trapped in a ceremonial vessel from which he is able to manipulate the reanimated body. Often, the zombie is forced to do manual labor, perform ceremonies, attack enemies, and so forth. In essence, zombies have lost what makes them human. For Aristotle, a human being is characterized as a rational animal. For him, the human soul is unique compared to that of other animals and plants because, unlike these others, the human soul contains a rational part. The rational part of the soul is responsible for the intellect. The intellect allows us to deliberate about our actions or the ways that we behave, rather than just doing whatever we want or living according to our animal, bodily, or biological impulses. The effect of deliberation on our behavior is characterized as the will. If you will an action, it means that you deliberated about it to a certain extent. It means that you are responsible for the action and that it is not involuntary. We can see here that, at least for Aristotle, the separation between the large part of the soul and the small part of the soul by a bakor would mean that individuals are no longer human because they no longer have a will of their own. So we're going to skip the part about difference between artificial and natural things. Yeah. Okay. So, unlike the zombies that populate mainstream fiction, these zombies are not dead. Their bodies are very much alive. However, it has no mind of its own. So, how does one become a consumer zombie? Obviously, it is not by means of the magic of a bakor. It is instead due to the capitalist mode of production and its effects on the human psyche. So I'm going to try to explain what I mean by that now. For Karl Marx, man-made goods are fetishized under the conditions of the capitalist mode of production because commodities dominate manufacturing. A commodity is a subset of man-made objects which are produced for the purpose of trade or exchange. In earlier, more traditional societies, once a community has become saturated with a useful object, production of this object turns towards trade or exchange with other communities. Essentially, all of the extra items produced can be exported for trade, provided benefits of this outweigh the cost. In order to understand commodity fetishism, we should discuss the distinction made by Marx between use value and exchange value. The use value of an object is the use that the object has in the day-to-day lives of people. For example, the use value of a chair, or what it is used for, is sitting. Exchange value, on the other hand, is the value that an object has in exchange, or its value as a commodity. This exchange value is not inherent to the object in the way that use value is. Rather, exchange value is a value that exists in relation to other commodities or exchangeable products. For example, under certain hypothetical conditions, 3 chairs may be exchanged for 1 table. This 3-to-1 ratio is the exchange value of tables in relation to chairs. In Capital, Marx explains that he chose to appropriate the idea of fetish from the realm of religion to describe commodities because, in religions, the products of the human brain appear as autonomous figures endowed with a life of their own, which enter into relations both with each other and with the human race. These products include gods and other spiritual deities, which, for Marx, are products of the human brain endowed with a life of their own. What he is saying about commodities is that they too are man-made objects that appear to us as autonomous figures endowed with a life of their own, and this life of their own is their exchange value. This object appears to have a value that is outside of human control, rather than being valued as a man-made useful object within our control that it actually is. For Marx, commodity fetishism in capitalist societies creates a distortion in the way that social relations involved in the production of artifacts are perceived and understood. Ideally, a community produces useful objects as a way of maintaining what can be understood as the life processes of the community. This life process of a community is somewhat analogous to what can be understood as the large part of the community's soul, or what sustains the community materially. Marx explains that man was not given by nature sharp claws or warm fur to ensure his survival. Instead, man was given reason to craft useful objects from nature in order to ensure his own survival. The useful objects produced in a community, therefore, represent the relation between the producers and the life processes of the community. Without the food we grow, the clothing we make, the shelters we build, we would not be able to maintain ourselves physically. These are the objects of labor that are useful in sustaining the life processes of the community. Now, for Marx, production of objects under conditions of the capitalist mode of production are not the outcome of such a process, because the life processes of the community no longer constitute the purpose of production. Instead, commodities tend to be produced by a different sort of rationality, or a different aspect of the intellect than the one that was connected to the life process of the community. This rationality concerns abstract calculations of profit and cost, or principles of exchange. Under conditions of the capitalist mode of production, the rationality inherent in the production of artifacts is therefore alienated from these life processes. So, when we look at large pharmaceutical companies and the drugs and medication they produce, we see that they do not do it in order to heal people or save lives. While their products may do this, it is not the purpose of producing medication. Instead, they do it for profit. If a medication is not profitable to produce, no matter how many lives it will save, it will not reach the market unless some other force, like a government or insurance company, pays for its production in order to subsidize the consumer. Otherwise, the medication will only be available to the rich. These companies only care about the community in which they serve to the extent that they can make money off of them. So, under the conditions of the capitalist mode of production, manufactured objects are not understood as useful to the material life process of a community, since they are understood in terms of abstract exchange value. This in turn alienates individuals from the world of useful man-made objects. The individuals not feel like a part of a community's life process when they produce something for society, and the man-made world that we find around us is one that is alien to us, or it is not one that supports the life processes of individuals or the community. On top of that, individuals are degraded themselves by this rationality, and the mind-numbing, unskilled labor of bureaucratic corporations and large-scale factories that tend to accompany this. And, because of the domination of capitalism in the markets of our society, individuals are dependent on this system of commodity production for their continued survival. We must all find a job if we are going to go on living. Robert Wicken writes that capitalism is portrayed by Marx as a system that progressively destroys the individual's sense of himself as participating in, ordering, shaping, and making his world. The man-made world is no longer one controlled by man and his biological needs. Instead, it is controlled by exchange values. Due to this, people feel powerless in the face of overwhelming political and economic forces. They have a weakened sense of themselves as participating in making and ordering this situation, and they have no sense of themselves as important or necessary to the community. This has the effect of weakening the small part of the soul, the part responsible for personality, character, and willpower. Workers become cogs in an alien machine, which they must conform to in order to survive. They therefore lose a sense of themselves as producers of the world around them. Essentially, in the living consumer zombies that we're trying to describe, the small part of the soul is not removed from the large part of the soul, as it is in Haitian voodoo tradition. Rather, the mind is weakened by the system of economic exploitation. As a result of this situation, one feels powerless to control the life processes of oneself and of the community. And feelings of powerlessness lead to the development of unconscious frustration, conscious and unconscious frustration, really. Now, according to Freud, narcissism develops due to frustrations which are caused by lack of control over the external world. This causes individuals to withdraw libidinal investment from the world and refocus it on themselves. Individuals have lost control over the world they live in, which, due to the nature of capitalist production, appears alien. This causes the buildup of frustration and fear due to lack of control, and this frustration and fear leads to narcissistic impulses. This narcissistic libidinal energy is manipulated by advertisers to tell consumers that they are important and that they matter. And this manipulation obviously serves the purpose of the capitalist mode of production. Advertisers tell frustrated, scared individuals that they can be important and they can matter and have control over their environment if they buy certain products that express this about them or that demonstrate a certain status. In so doing, the narcissistic libidinal impulses built up by the frustration and disappointment of one's work life can be satisfied by buying products at the mall. Individuals who do this are zombies. They have a weakened sense of themselves as ordering and controlling the world around them. This weakness is manipulated by advertisers who provide an outlet for the narcissistic buildup caused by frustrations due to this weakness in the world of commodities. The advertisers serve here as behaviours, controlling the minds of consumers. Individuals in this way are manipulated to behave in ways that serve the system of commodity production. They behave not in ways suggesting a strong ego or a strong sense of self, character, and personality. They behave in predictable ways, which furthers the capitalist machine. The appeal of the dissociated fetish object is always to the dissociated consumer. It reinforces the narcissism of the individual whose ego weakness and dependency is a manifestation of the loss of any formative or constructive power in relation to commodities. So their narcissistic investment is a way for them to gain some sort of feeling of satisfaction and control from commodities when the world is so out of control. The system of production thus manipulates and controls the psyches of those who make it work both as producers and consumers. A zombie is a passive consumer, one who does not think about the reason for purchasing decisions. This person has been manipulated by advertising and the mass media to behave in a predictable way. I like that slide there. All right.
So, how do we fight back against our current predicament? If we take a philosophical standpoint when answering the question, a viable answer would be to fight back with education. The key to de-zombifying Western civilization is to educate individuals in such a way that they learn how to think for themselves. The key is an education in critical thought. Here we will discuss Adorno and Becker's solution for providing zombified individuals with minds. To begin, we'll start with Kant, as Adorno and Becker's solution built on his theory. In a short essay entitled "What is Enlightenment?", Kant discusses man's current predicament. He sees individuals as being trapped in a state of immaturity, and he says that individuals ought to become enlightened. Enlightenment for Kant is man's release from his self-incurred tutelage, with tutelage being defined as the inability to make use of one's own reason without direction from another. Tutelage can be categorized as a byproduct of laziness due to feelings of powerlessness and cowardice due to fear of the alien world. Kant writes, "If I have a book which understands for me, a pastor who has a conscience for me, a physician who decides on my diet, why would I ever need to think for myself if everyone can do it all for me?" Tutelage is something that has been created almost like a social construct and results in a scenario where the majority of individuals lead a lazy and scared existence. In this situation, individuals are unable to use their own reason because the small part of their souls, or the petit bon âge, has been weakened by the capitalist mode of production and is now controlled by the becours of advertising. These individuals, rather than thinking for themselves or questioning the world around them, have the government and social forces for them, they think for them, and prescribe to them actions to engage in. Kant in his essay does not explicitly make the connection between enlightenment and the institution of education, though it's not hard to imagine how it all come together. Applying Kant's ideas about enlightenment to education is where Adorno and Becker take up their position. In a radio discussion entitled "Education for Maturity and Responsibility," Adorno and Becker talk about the failings of our current education system. They critique the adaptive goals that are advocated in education and offer a reformation based on students becoming enlightened, free-thinking individuals. An education of this sort would have teachers teaching various subjects to their pupils, while also understanding that the pupils will one day surpass them in terms of their acquired knowledge and understanding. Adorno and Becker write, "The ideal of an education of such would be that teachers need to realize that their main task is to make themselves superfluous to their students at just the right time. Adorno contends that the individual must listen to authority as a child, internalize it, realize the faults that are within it, and then detach themselves when they realize that they can find autonomy in themselves, rather than given to them by an overarching figurehead." Adorno and Becker, in the aforementioned excerpt, discuss how individuals would become mature through education. On their account, the mature individual is realized when the person can reject the external authority figure in favor of their own internal one. It would follow that Adorno and Becker seem to suggest that it is in high school and/or higher learning institutions that the capacity for autonomy appears within the individual, as the individual has the potential to ground their autonomy within themselves. It is important on their account to have an authority figure when the individual is in the process of maturation, such as primary school, because rejecting authority before the capacity for maturity can be realized will lead to what is termed pseudo-maturity. The position that Adorno and Becker take state that all that needs to be done on the part of education is to open people's minds to become aware of the ways in which society and other overarching figures work to manipulate them. In this, one can learn to be critical and think for oneself. In relation to the zombie apocalypse, the only way to survive it is to reclaim one's humanity. The small part of the soul, if we go back to Aristotle, is the seat of rationality. It is this portion that makes us human. So to reclaim our humanity, it must be strengthened. The bon ange can be strengthened through trial and error. Individuals need to learn about the world they inhabit and critically engage with it, rather than being alienated from it. So a critical education would allow individuals to reflect on what is being prescribed to them through advertisements in the mass media. Once the bon ange has been strengthened, the advertisement industry, as a bokor, will no longer be able to take hold and control the minds of the individuals, sending them to the mall to mindlessly consume and alleviate their frustrations towards a world from which they are alienated. For example, an individual engaging in critical thought would question the consumption practices advocated by consumer culture and capitalism. That individual would then be able to make rational and well thought out decisions about whether they ought to engage in bokor prescribed behaviors or to resist and engage in some other sort of action. Hence, these once zombified humans will be humans once more, because the small part of their souls, their bon ange, will function as it should, liberating them from the zombie apocalypse. Thank you.